Greetings, kindred. I am Voivode Maquette, and this is Our World of Darkness, where today we'll be continuing through our reading of Chicago by Night for Vampire the Masquerade 5th edition. We continue on with Chapter 4, Kindred of Chicago, where we are on the Brujah segment, which I have split between the Hellenes and the Fiorars, if I'm pronouncing that right. The Fiorars would like nothing more than to see the high and mighty Chicago Camarilla fall, and the right time to act may not be far away. Though Anita Wainwright and Genghis jockey for the Anarch leadership role, at least among the Brujah, they both agree that Jackson and the whole Primogen Council needs to fall in a way that doesn't make martyrs of them. They need to look foolish. The Camarilla needs to lose faith in Chicago. And a space needs to be created for anarchy to blossom. Anita Wainwright. Epitaph. Anarch Intelligence Exchange. Quote, I know you have this misconception that all anarchs are mindless thugs. I'm here to convince you otherwise. Clan Brujah. Mortal days, natural rebel. Anita Wainwright has been fighting the man since the 1950s, when she was a student at the University of Illinois. She took several freedom rides with mixed-race groups on public buses to Alabama, challenging the enforcements of illegal bus segregation laid down by Morgan vs. Virginia. She joined up with the Diggers in New York City and ran a free store in Chicago, writing for a local underground newspaper, the Chicago Seed. Throughout her young adult life, she flitted from cause to cause, passionately believing in revolution through communal deeds. That helping the common man would lead to the overthrow of the rich and powerful. During her time as a reporter for the Seed, she met a Black Panther named Theodore Dooley. She quickly stuck up an intimate relationship with him. The relationship was the final straw for her conservative parents, who disowned her over her refusal to stop seeing Dooley. Spurred by the fight with her parents, she threw herself more fiercely into her activism, which was subtly encouraged by Dooley. Anita was one of the organizers who helped plan the Vietnam War protests at Chicago Democratic National Convention in 1968. Police were sent to break up the protesters, and Anita lost Dooley in the crowd before she was badly beaten by an officer. After she recovered, she went looking for Dooley to find out what happened to him. After several days and nights of searching, she eventually found him in the basement of a building, acting as a headquarters for the Black Panthers. She stumbled across him drinking the blood of a cop that had beaten her in the protest. At first she was horrified, but she quickly accepted the situation, even before Dooley had a chance to explain. She saw the act not as a literal thirst for blood, but a metaphorical one. She was angry and wanted vengeance. They spent a few nights together, and by the end of it, Anita convinced Dooley to embrace her. Kindred nights at the cusp. At first, Anita used her newfound kindred strength to drive more fully into the concerns of the human world. But at the 70s came and went, her involvement in mortal society waned. As she and Dooley turned their attentions to the reformation of kindred society instead, her passions had changed, and propensity for bloodthirsty revenge hadn't diminished one iota, however. And she is one of the few anarchs in Chicago to develop connections all over the country. Think locally, act globally, she would often say. And she spent countless nights making phone calls, writing letters, and even risking dangerous travel to meet with potential allies in her cause. By the 90s, Camarilla control over Chicago was stronger than ever, and she was considering moving to one of the Anarch Free States in California. That's when the Lupines attacked, slaughtered many of the local kindred. She barely managed to avoid the claws of a werewolf herself, but many of her friends were not so lucky, including her sire and lover Dooley. Her need for revenge intensified, and she swore to find and destroy the Lupines who killed her friends. Anita stayed in Chicago and carefully planned her next steps. She spent years accumulating information about her foes. Her networks of connections increased as she became less discerning about the allegiance of her kindred contacts. Anarchs, independents, and even moderately high-ranking members of the sex traded correspondences and phone calls with her, all to accumulate whatever knowledge she could about the Chicago Lupines. Indeed, it was Anita who received the first rumors about the Lasombra coming to Chicago. She attempted to trade the information to some of her local Camarilla contacts in exchange for the whereabouts of the werewolves or their descendants by the time they came to trust her offer. The prince announced the arrival of the Lasombra delegates to the whole court. Her information was useless, but many of her more reluctant contacts recognized the quality of her information network. Mark Levesque has also quietly joined her, helping to maintain her network while plotting his own revenge against the kindred of Chicago. Plots and schemes. Solid ground. Now Anita has moved from occasionally useful to extremely useful in the eyes of many powerful kindred on all sides. She wants to tread carefully and reinforce her power base before she makes any big moves. Doubtful connections. One of her Camarilla contacts is Clisius. His well-known sexism worked against Anita for decades, and even though they shared a clan, she saw him as the embodiment of the patriarchal system that held her and her friends down. With the Entelechy School, she sees the potential value the elder brings to the city. Anita isn't sure if she wants to suck up to the elder and maybe convince him to join the Anarchs or arrange to have him killed. She doesn't know how the Eternal Academy or what happens to its failed fledgling students yet. Dark past. Anita is still extremely well connected. She has links to Brujah and Anarchs all over the United States, and she's willing to get anyone in touch with anyone, as long as she trusts them and considers their cause to be worthwhile. She's aware that her list of contacts is valuable, why she doesn't disclose it to anyone. No Camarilla kindred wants to have it known they've collaborated with an Anarch, so the implicit blackmail keeps her safe. Wolf hunt. She hasn't lost sight of her true goal, finding the werewolves who killed her friends. She recognizes some of them may be dead after 25 years of looking, so she's happy to vengeance against their families or loved ones at this point. She would do almost anything for concrete, first-hand information on how to kill werewolves, or where her enemies live right now. Domain and Haven. The Riverdale Community. Contacts 3, Haven 2, Herd 3, Influence 2, Resources 1. Riverdale is one of those areas allotted to the Brujah as feeding ground, back when Ventrue princes were trying to shaft the clans. Today, it's still an area where crime is too high and the average wage is too low. Anita has quietly claimed it for the Anarch cause, and no one has contested her because very few kindred actually want it. Riverdale Communal Homestead. Allies 4, Contacts 3, Haven 3. Anita lives in a house that looks condemned, but she has renovated the inside to be quite comfortable, modern, and secure. Several Anarchs use the building as crash space, most notably Mark Levesque, her informal enforcer. Thralls and Tools. Frances, Retainers 3. When she started her plans of revenge against the Lupine, she created a ghoul, a young black man named Francis, who reminds her of Dooley, to help her with tasks not requiring her direct attention. Now that she's more secure, she plans to embrace Francis. The problem is, she either needs to get Camarilla permission for the embrace, thus reducing her standings in the eyes of the Anarchs, or flaunt the traditions for her own gain, thus reducing her utility in the eyes of the Camarilla contacts, and risking banishment or destruction. She is currently debating embracing Francis and blaming one of her rivals for poaching him. Nation of Islam. Allies 3, Contacts 3, Herd 3. Anita hides behind mortal protest groups and foundations for the disenfranchised citizens of Chicago and Gary. She's genuinely respected among the Chicago wing of the Nation of Islam, despite her outsider status, and often relies on them for favors such as protecting her haven and tracking her enemies. Kindred relationships. Gerard. Problematic. Mark Levesque is her biggest supporter and her biggest problem. He's passionately devoted to the Anarchs in general and to her specifically. He's also passionately devoted to kicking the shit out of Balthazar. Balthazar hasn't exactly made a lot of friends within the Camarilla, but he's still part of the Ivory Tower, so the optics of a hardcore Anarch killing a hardcore Camarilla kindred just doesn't work for her. At the same time, she knows she can only put Gerard off of his murderous plans for so long. Critias. Work in progress. Anita is developing a business relationship with Critias, the Brujah Primogen. Recently, he's started to display both more rebellious tendencies and a fervent desire to actually help the mortals in Chicago. The big problem is that he doesn't seem to trust her because she's a woman, which rouses her feminist instincts. They perform a careful dance to not set each other off because both see the value in collaboration. Rosa Hernandez. Potential. Both women despise werewolves. Anita knows they took her love away, Rosa because she feels betrayed by the savagery of their nature. Anita feels the two could form an effective coterie of lupine hunters, if only she could convince the gangrel to join the Anarchs. Whispers. National Network. Anita is the Anarch's information hub. If you want any Anarch in the United States to know something, you only have to tell her. Big game. Anita is a fearsome werewolf hunter, with over a dozen pelts hanging on her wall. The little things. Anita is such a hardcore Chicagoan that she has 4 stars tattooed on her back. Brujah blood. Anita and Mark Levesque are lovers. Mask and mane. Anita is a Caucasian female of moderate size. She stands 5 foot 8 inches tall and weighs 125 pounds. She has auburn hair. She often dyes or shaves down. and dresses casually in modern styles, although she tends towards a retro look that seems to cycle back into the fashions of from time to time. She has a carefully cultivated appearance. Her dress, demeanor, and speech patterns are calibrated to give off a vibe of young, brash Brujah, but she knows what she's doing. She can dial her revolutionary rhetoric up or down at a moment's notice to suit her audience. Anita uses the identity of Patricia Dooley as her mask, the widow of deceased Theodore Dooley. Patricia is a private woman who occasionally handles charity work at the city's children's centers. Her standoffish behavior enough to prevent most deep questions. Mask of one. Sire, Theodore Dooley. Embrace, 1968, born in 1941. Ambition, eradicate the lupines who killed my friends. Convictions, protect my memory of Dooley. Touchstones, Francis, the ghoul who reminds her of Dooley. Humanity of 8, Generation 12, Blood Potency 2, Attributes, Strength 3, Dexterity 4, Stamina 5, Charisma 4, Manipulation 3, Composure 3, Intelligence 4, Wits 4, Resolve 5. Secondary Attributes, Health 8, Willpower 8. Skills, Athletics 3, Firearms 1, Melee 2, Larceny, Breaking in 3. Stealth 2, Animal Kin 2, Etiquette 1, Insight 3, Intimidation, Silent Treatment 1. Persuasion 4, Academics 2, Investigation 2, Medicine 2, Occult, Lupines 2, Politics, Anarchs 3, Technology 2. Disciplines, Celerity 3, Fortitude 1, Potence 1, Presence 2. Genghis. Epitaph, self-appointed anarch visionary. Quote, "Fuck you very much, Mr. Prince." Clan Brujah. Mortal Days, Campaign Punk. Genghis comes in 2 shades, the legend and the truth behind it. Mortal Days, Campaign Punk. Genghis comes in 2 shades, the legend and the truth behind it. Despite being born into a rich family, Genghis was a wild child. He was a part of the punk movement in Chicago in the early 70s, dressing and acting the part with leather, tattoos, piercings, and plenty of spikes. His mother disapproved, but loved him all the same, calling it a phase before making the punk rocker's bed. He followed garage bands and loved being part of the scene. For the time, he was far out there, and society treated him as such. He got to rebel at night and enjoy fine food and accommodations during the day. It was a perfect mix of hypocrisy that often accompanies youthful rebellion. He and his father would frequently go to Chicago Bulls games together when the team first formed, and despite the incongruous sight of a man in a cardigan sitting next to a pierced hulk of a youth, the two always took courtside seats together. It was his outlandish style and in-your-face attitude that drew his sire's attention. She forced the embrace on Genghis. Wildly passionate over his Trotskyite speeches at a local dive bar, she only spent a couple of weeks with him, leaving his side when she realized his purported communist was living off an allowance from a Virgo's parents. For Genghis's part, he kept up the lifestyle even after his parents passed away, and he inherited their property and investments. Kindred Knights. Thorn in the Camarilla. Throughout the years, Genghis frequently enjoyed playing the troll, when it came to the established Camarilla. He always tried to work towards undermining the elders within the city, though this method may not have been as covert as he believed them to be. His destructive actions often led to the snowball effect, with Genghis ending up on the losing side of the battle he was unprepared to fight. It was Genghis who pointed lupines at Loden's penthouse, hoping change in leadership would make for equality in the domain of Chicago. Instead, it resulted in a lot of his friends getting killed. Feeling immense guilt, Genghis resolved to never again go off half-cocked. Turbulence and discord can be an anarch's best friend, and with the recent ascension of Kevin Jackson, along with the Second Inquisition's appearance, Genghis is in his element. Between the Chicago protest marches, as well as many of the elders disappearing, Genghis has turned into a rather charismatic leader, more so out of need than desire. When the Brujah left the Camarilla, Genghis took many of the Chicago clan members under his protection, breaking out from his former follower mentality, welcoming his brothers and sisters into the movement. He helped them get established safely, despite Prince Jackson's scrutiny. He helped them acclimate to the drastically different culture of the Anarchs, showing them the ropes and how to fit in. He also makes sure they stay connected if they choose to travel or move. Genghis is part of the Kind's anti-fascist movement, have increased in prominence. Chicago has been a central point in the #resist movement, with frequent protests, rallies, and rioters. With his punk lifestyle, counterculture mentality, and new outlook on leadership, he fits right in with those looking to cause a little chaos. Kevin Jackson is all too aware of this, but knows stopping the movement would tilt the Anarchs in his direction. Genghis is therefore allowed a certain amount of freedom, though Jackson's heel grows increasingly close to the Brujah's head. Genghis continues to remind the prince he is still in the city, and he is a force to be reckoned with. He frequently uses his pull within the Kind to make sure these marches are large and disruptive. It's Genghis's way of letting the Camarilla know they are not the only ones controlling the herd. Whether this will continue to work or not is anyone's guess, but Genghis seems to think this is a good path for him to walk down. He's a hero for the common anarch. But of course, by dawn, he's back in his penthouse haven, sleeping in silk sheets in one of the most expensive parts of Chicago. It's hard being the leader of a revolution. Plots and schemes. Newfound power. Genghis is no slouch in wielding influence over the Anarchs and the Kind, but he is still unsure of how exactly best used it. This is all new to him. Until recently, he was a poster boy and held little power. Now, with the Brujah defection to the Anarchs, his moves are scrutinized. He mostly follows the trends of the vocal left-wing Kind, which has served him well so far. But he wants to meet with like-minded kindred to come up with some grand plans for the city. Nesting. Genghis has always kept his penthouse haven within the city. Much to the jargon of his coterie, Genghis likes having a comfortable place to bunk down and relax, which he does often. His coterie encourages him to lease it out to visiting anarch dignitaries, but Genghis is very possessive over his property. He's weighing up whether to sacrifice his privacy and wealth for the good of the movement. Stick it to the man. Genghis knows very little about the Lasombra, but he does know he doesn't want a strengthened Camarilla. He's tempted to sabotage any upcoming Lasombra visit. Or, if he can find some charming Anarch, try to win any visiting keepers over to the Anarch movement instead. Domain and Haven. Gold Coast Penthouse. Haven for, resources for. Genghis keeps a fancy penthouse on the Gold Coast of Chicago, which overlooks the busiest parts of the city. It is very clean and modern, not the type of dwelling most would associate with an Anarch. He tries to keep the appearance of being from rougher parts of the city, so he rarely brings any vampires back to his haven. Punk Quarters. Contacts 3, Herd 3, Influence 2. Genghis spends a lot of time in the old punk quarters in Chicago, such as Halsted Street and Clark Street, where his appearance doesn't faze most of the residents. This is also where he feeds, enjoying a clinch with dangerous punks and rockers as bodies thrash to searching music. Thralls and Tools. Anarch Movement Allies 4. Genghis is well connected within the Anarch movement and uses those connections to help younger Brujah. Fledgling Anarchs on the edge of Chicago report to Genghis like he's an iconic warlord. For Genghis, appearances make his reputation. Antifa. Allies 2, Contacts 2, Influence 1, Retainers 2. Genghis has joined the Antifa movement within the city. While there is no formal organization, he is connected to several of their members, who are always glad to send a little mayhem to the oppressive powers that be. He has made one Antifa protester, Darcy Pock, his ghoul. He admires how readily she throws herself into the fray, and how unafraid she seems of jail time. Sunburst Excess. Contacts 1, Influence 1. Genghis, at one point, had high society connections, though those have weakened over the years. With the rising gap between upper and lower classes, Genghis has found he holds more sway over the latter. He misses his executive friends, however, and still receives the occasional invite to go golfing with Sunburst Excess. The Latin Kings, Allies 2, Contacts 2. Perez, Retainers 1. Genghis has a strong relationship with some of the local gang members, specifically a young Latino named Perez of the Latin Kings. Genghis and Perez have worked together on certain projects to help the youth of Chicago. Genghis is aware of the hypocrisy, as Perez deals drugs to the youth's parents when the youths aren't around. The punk scene. Allies 3, Contacts 2. Genghis maintains close ties to the aging punk scene in Chicago, hanging out at sites like the Mohawk of North Avenue. He occasionally calls on them to commit acts of petty violence or public disorder. Kindred relationships. Chicago Anarchs. Underwhelming. Genghis loves his fellow Windy City Anarchs, but realizes the heady days of Chicago's Anarchs are gone. When the Hounds' persecution of Anarchs commenced, many drifted to Milwaukee and Indianapolis. Genghis knows he has to work with the other members of his coterie to strengthen the Anarch movement in Chicago. But he's restricted to 10 members. He's contemplating a play for Baron, but knows he'll face competition from Anita or Maldavis. Abraham Disable. Friendly. Genghis's relationship with Disable is an odd one, as despite the two of them sitting on either side of the sectarian fence, they both enjoy jazz and still attend clubs together. Genghis embraces what he calls his bipartisanism sensibilities, while Disable just enjoys the company of a vampire who can appreciate music. Kevin Jackson, necessary evil. Bobby Weatherbottom, necessary sacrifice. Genghis made a deal with Kevin Jackson that he's yet to announce to the other Anarchs of the city. As long as the Anarchs don't attack Camarilla Kindred, up to 10 are allowed to remain in Chicago, and will, in turn, remain unaccosted. Anyone not on the list is fair game for the sheriff and hounds. There was an added caveat. Jackson was clear that any Ventru identifying as Anarch must be handed over to Chrysius for re-education. Genghis is eyeing up Bobby Weatherbottom and wondering how dirty he's willing to get his hands in exchange for 10 unassailable Anarch spots in the city. Whispers. Warlock slave. The Tremere frequently use Genghis as a pawn, planting commands into his psyche and making him behave against Anarch interests. Wanted man. Chrysius and Damien, possibly the last true Camarilla in Chicago, have Genghis marked for death. They believe he represents everything wrong with their clan. Sowing bloody oats, Genghis has created several children over the years, few of whom knew Genghis was their sire until recently. Genghis has been slowly contacting those children to hopes of expanding his influence and power. Mask and mane. Genghis appears to be influenced by the punk rock era of the 80s and 90s, complete with the leather jacket, dagger tattoo on his right ear, and safety pin through his nose. He completes his look with a shaved head, which gives him a rather intimidating appearance. He hasn't changed this look in over 2 decades. When participating in riots, he frequently wears black bandana around his mouth, evoking the Antifa movement. Genghis's real name is Rupert Levine, and he still uses it as a mask. Technically, he should be over 50 or so years older than he looks. So, he's on the lookout for kindred who can fabricate a new member of the Levine family as a fresh mask. Mask 1. Sire. Hethrika. Embrace, 1972, born 1954. Ambition. Forge a permanent place for the Anarchs in Chicago. Conviction. Always fight oppression. Touchstone. Perez. Latin Kings gang member. And lookout for the Anarchs. Humanity 7. Generation 12. Blood potency for 1. Attribute. Strength 4, Dexterity 3, Stamina 3. Charisma 3, Manipulation 2, Composure 2, Intelligence 3, Wits 3, Resolve 2. Secondary attributes, Health 6, Willpower 4. Skills, Athletics, Basketball 3, Brawl 2, Drive 2, Firearm, Handguns 3, Larceny 2, Etiquette 2, Insight 2, Intimidation, Size 2, Leadership 2, Persuasion, Oratory 2, Streetwise, Antifa 3, Subterfuge 2, Awareness 2, Investigation 1, Politics, Anarch, Communism 2, Technology 1. Discipline: celerity 2, fortitude 1, potence 2, presence 3. Gerard Marc Levesque. Epitaph: Scarred, Brujah Firebrand. Quote: Non, sir. Si en est pas una revolte, si est una revolution. Clan Brujah. Mortal days, from vandal to bomber. Levesque is a proud French Canadian, from a long line of proud French Canadians. As a radical Quebecanois, he longs for independence from Quebec. Such a movement wasn't well organized in the late 1860s when he was growing up, but he was still fiercely devoted to the cause. His first rebellious act was to paint a mustache on a bust of Queen Victoria at the tender age of 12. As he matured, his plans grew more sophisticated, such as throwing paint or acid on English citizens, or bombing their homes and businesses at night. During a trip to Quebec to recruit soldiers for the Confederate cause, Thomas Ewell met Levesque, and Ewell was attracted to the Quebecanois revolutionary fever. The two became friends, and when the American Civil War broke out, Levesque helped Ewell acquire supplies and explosives to send back south. After Ewell was embraced as a vampire, the two maintained a regular friendly correspondence. In 1870, Ewell helped Levesque's plans his most daring act of sabotage yet, the bombing of a post office. The plan was bulletproof, but things went wrong when Levesque's companion tripped while throwing a bundle of lit dynamite. The Quebecanois barely managed to dive behind a carriage before the explosion killed his compatriot. While Levesque survived, he was badly injured. Not wanting to seek medical treatment and risk arrest, he managed to limp and crawl his way back to the basement of his hideout. Levesque was on the brink of death when Ewell discovered him several nights later. Kindred nights burned in many ways. The two slept in the basement, and the following evening Ewell named Balthazar, in his immortal state, took his new child, Levesque, to meet Balthazar's sire, Alexis Blanc. Within moments, Levesque was smitten by the beautiful French vampire, but the woman was angry. It wasn't until much later that Levesque learned he had been embraced without Alexis' knowledge or permission. Balthazar was sent away, and Alexis offered her vitae to Levesque over the next 3 nights. During that time, she was comforting, witty, and elegant, and Levesque fell deeply in love with her. Eventually, Balthazar was forgiven, and the 3 of them became fast friends. They talked a lot about uprising, politics, and the creation of a Brujah state, but Levesque didn't need to be sold. His sire and his friend, and his grandsire, was the love of his life. For them, he would go anywhere. Then it all went wrong. He was lying next to his true love, his grandsire, becoming sleepy as the sun threatened to peek over the horizon. One moment, his eyes were locked as he enjoyed a gentle pull into torpor slumber. And the next, he heard a scream. He turned to see Alexis with a stake buried in her chest and Balthazar holding it. Levesque could smell smoke and hear the crackle of flames as their haven was put to the torch. Balthazar grabbed his child and threw him out the back door, telling him to run. With the first rays of the sun pecking over the horizon, Levesque had little choice. It wasn't until months later that Levesque learned what had happened. Balthazar sold them out to the Ventru in exchange for money and comfortable position within the Camarilla. For several years, the mere mention of Balthazar's name spurred Levesque into frenzy. Levesque also learned about the blood bond, but refused to believe that what he shared with Alexis was anything but pure and spiritual love. He continued to collaborate with the local anarchs, particularly Anita Wainwright and her lover and sire Dooley. The Lupines attacked in the 1990s. Haven and Alicia were all raided by the werewolves, and many kindred died in the conflict. Anita's anarch group was hit as well, and Levesque managed to help Anita get to safety before he fell under their claw. He spent the last of his blood to merge with the earth, but not before the sun had started to burn his flesh, leaving the grass covered in ash. Levesque spent years in torpor under the ground, recovering. Eventually, the ground ejected him near a group of mortals looking for a geocache. Without thinking, Levesque murdered all of them and drank their blood before slipping away. He wandered aimlessly until he found a basement in an abandoned building. A glance in a broken mirror over a rusty sink told him the claws of the lupines added even more scars to his face. Once again, he escaped the burning building. Once again, he was horribly injured and scarred. Once again, he recovered in a basement. By the time he had fully recovered, he learned the kindred of the city believed him to be dead, but his hated sire was still alive, hiding his face and going by the name Gerard, after the poet Gerard de Nerval. He claimed to be a caitiff, new to the city. Learning Anita also survived, but also lost her lover, Gerard spent several months proving she was trustworthy before revealing himself to her. Now the two anarchs plot and schemes, but at cross purposes. Anita is trying to play all sides against the other to further the cause. But Gerard only wants one thing: to kill Balthazar with his own hands. Plots and schemes. Aggressive outburst. Gerard isn't good at keeping a low profile. Sure, he's diligent about keeping his face covered, and over the years he's gotten used to being called Gerard instead of Frenchie. But he doesn't have the temperament to keep his head down. Instead, he's prone to rash acts of destruction and violence. More than once, he's nearly taken a swing at Balthazar, or people who mention Balthazar's name. So he seeks a way to retain self-control, governed by impulse. If the anarchs come to Gerard and ask him to plan the bombing of an art gallery, he can do it with no problem. But if they ask him to plan a long-term revolution against the local Camarilla, he'll get frustrated in a few weeks in, and end up just jumping someone. He's looking for potential Mullah who can teach him the benefits of patience and tactical planning. Time to plan. Much of Gerard's plans fall within two groups. Whatever Anita needs from me, and anything to get back at that asshole Balthazar. Anything that doesn't lead to one of these two avenues won't hold the attention for long. That said, Gerard can think more than one step ahead, and has vague ideas of how to use the recent arrival of the La Sombra to try and get back at Balthazar. Domain and Haven. Riverdale Communal Homestead. Haven 1, Gerard doesn't hold any domain, and he doesn't have a haven. Most nights he sleeps in Anita's basement. He goes hunting on his own, feeding quietly on whatever mortal opportunity provides. Half the Brujah in the city joke he's more Gangrel or Nosferatu as a result. Half the Brujah in the city also get punched a lot. Thralls and Tools. Genevieve McAllister, Contacts 1, Retainers 1. Genevieve is an outspoken feminist activist. Gerard met her at a punk club in Westtown, and the two hit it off after she kicked him in the balls for thinking he was hitting on her. She's drawn to his unconventional good looks, and he's drawn to her outspoken nature. She looks a bit like Anita, too, but he hasn't realized that consciously. Toby, Allies 1, Retainers 2. Toby is Gerard's ghoul and general gopher. They have a knack for finding things and blending in anywhere, even with multicolored hair, and a wide variety of tattoos. Gerard once called them a bloodhound, making a reference to the dog in the Signs of the Four, but Toby didn't get the joke. Kindred relationships. Anita Wainwright, Mala 2, and Worried. Gerard supports Anita and does whatever she needs him to do in the name of the cause. Lately, he's become concerned about how much she's been cozying up to Critias, the Brujah Primogen. She claims that she's working to convert him to the Anarchs, but Gerard isn't sure that any Anarch vampire is worth that much effort. But she's the boss. Balthazar, Revulsion. Fuck Balthazar. Just fuck that ignorant, racist asshole so goddamn much. Whispers. Hired gun. Gerard is Anita's assassin, willing to kill anyone who works against her. Fast temper. Don't even mention Balthazar around Gerard. He gets really angry if you do. Way back. Gerard used to be a big deal in Chicago, from around Loden's time. Aren't you? Gerard's struggling to maintain his false identity, and longs for the night where he can once again call himself Marc Levesque. Mask and mean. At one time, Gerard looked like a dashing young French Canadian. Upon his embrace, he gained several scars all over his body, including his face. But they simply added to the roguish charm, making him appear dangerous. After the lupine attack, even more scars covered his face, making him almost unrecognizable. These nights, Gerard tends to wear hoodies, balaclavas, bandanas, fashionable medical masks, and other items of clothing that hide his face. He claims it's to keep people from being disgusted by his scars, but the truth is, it's to make sure that no one recognizes him. Gerard is the mask. When he has to pose as a mortal, he adopts the guise of a war veteran, an international student, or a tourist recently involved in a car accident. Mask 1. Sire, Thomas Ewell, Balthazar. Embrace, 1870, born 1850. Ambition. Launch a devastating attack that humiliates the Camarilla. Conviction. Always take an eye for an eye. Touchstones. Genevieve McAllister. The woman who reminds him why he's so angry. Humanity 5. Generation 9. Blood potency 3. Attributes: Strength 4, Dexterity 4, Stamina 3, Charisma 4, Manipulation 4, Composure 3, Intelligence 3, Wits 3, Resolve 2. Secondary attributes: Health 6, Willpower 5. Skills: Athletics 3, Brawl, Boxing 3, Drive 1, Firearms 3, Larceny, Vandalism 2. Stealth 2, Insight 2, Streetwise 2, Awareness 3, Investigation 2, Politics, Anarchy 2, Science 2, Technology, Bombs 2. Disciplines: Celerity 3, Potence for Presence 2 and Protean 3. And I believe that is where we are going to stop tonight. This is a bit of a long book, but we are coming along. We will continue next, continuing with Chapter 4, Kindred of the City, with Vacative. And I believe that we might... I will attempt to get that done in one reading. Though, that is a bit... Thank you for joining me in our world of darkness. I am Voivode Maquette, and this has been Chicago by Night for Vampire the Masquerade, 5th edition. Good evening.